Professor Kevin Knight will give his guest lecture, which ties machine learning, statistical machine learning, natural language processing, and how to break so-called code from secret society. In other words, classical crypto analysis, all in one package. So this gives us a broad perspective. But for my own sequence of lectures, today I will talk about pseudo-random number generator, a concrete example. And so my Monday lecture will try to expand a little bit more into the theoretical foundation of one-way function and the hardcore bits in a slightly more detailed analysis. And that lecture may last for that day and cross over to the when I come back from New York. So these three lectures of my own perhaps will be the most technical lectures, which we are going to see in one stretch. And but we have significant build up already. So and also today's material is relatively still less heavy technically than the Monday will probably slightly more technically weighted. And so once we go through here, I think we essentially went through majority of the detailed analysis of the fundamental concept, like pseudo-randomness, one-way function, encryption, and so on. And you know, I have a 4-year-old. You know, watching kids grow up, you always pick up little things that they say. The very first sentence my daughter somehow learned is, instead of saying it's our business, it says that it's our business. Right? So somehow that sentence keeps on striking my head. I said, the next 3 lectures are business, so we need to do the technical part. Right? So, so then afterward, I will move into combined topics such as zero-knowledge proof and how to exchange keys. That eventually, hopefully, lead up to some of your technical presentations. Right? So that is the overall plan. And I hope Kevin's lecture really give us sort of a very orthogonal angle to, you know, his background is quite orthogonal, so it gives us a quite orthogonal angle to look at crypto in this broad framework of statistical analysis, learning, and so on. Right? So today we will focus upon one very concrete pseudo-random number generator. So this is called Blom sum generator. Often referred as BS generator. So this is one of the generator. This is a generator perhaps the most widely used in practice. You will see also because due to its quite seemingly good efficiency here, and it comes with a very beautiful proof. So this is one thing we can do in one lecture, a very beautiful proof to prove that on the proper assumption, this satisfies the mathematical properties of pseudo-randomness. Okay. So the first Blom is Lenore Blom. She's a great mathematician used to teach at Berkeley, actually more in continuous mathematics. And the second Blom is the Blom which we mentioned, like Blom prime. And they are indeed husband and wife, so they are a remarkable mathematical teams. And some actually is all more in math than computer science historically, and study a lot about algebraic computation, group theory, and so on. And so this generator is beautiful in part, largely also because it's analysis. Right? It's not just sort of somehow the construction is so simple and elegant. The analysis actually is quite simple and elegant. So BSS generator use essentially all the concepts we already know, which we touched upon during our time of encryption. Right? So this is, like I mentioned last time, this is the age that pseudo-random number generators are produced because people have deeper understanding of encryption, right? So somehow encryption provided the mathematical foundation, framework, as well as many concrete problems allow us to build the generator. So to just quickly recall that like RSA, we are working with a composite with a large product of two larger primes, the P and Q. In this generator, for analysis, it's also easier to go with so-called Bloom number. That is PQ is equal to 3 mod 4. I will mention an explicit property why 3 mod 4 is a very clean concept here, clean property here. And so this recall that so once we are working with the product of two primes, the algebraic structure changes from mod prime. It's no longer a field, which means that when we cleanly look at those numbers, remember this one symbol which I mentioned called Jacobi, or like xn, or some historically we write as xn, right? We said this is equal to either 0 if GCD x equal to the GCD x and n is not equal to 1, right? It's a multiple of P and Q, or 1 if the Legendre symbol, because now we only have two primes now. So if basically x mod p and x mod q are perfect squares, respectively, belong to the QR, the perfect square quadratic residue of p, and the quadratic residue of q. So those are the numbers that when you raise the power to p minus 1 divided by 2, mod p, mod q, relatively, respectively, is give you 1. And the third stat is it give you 1 or negative 1. So either they both in this, or they both not in this. Right, so either they're both perfect square or not perfect square. So this is the second class. Then third class is negative 1, which means that x p minus 1 divided by 2 mod p times x p minus 1 q minus 1 2 mod q. Right, so we're building upon the product of this predicate. So in this setting, the Jacobi symbol divided the number into 4 groups of the n star. Right, the 4 groups are the perfect square of the n star in the Dn. Right, the perfect square mod mod n is perfect square in mod n, or now we call the pseudo perfect square. That is, they pass the Jacobi test, but they are not perfect square. So those are corresponding to when you mod p and mod q, they both are equal to negative 1. Right? So this corresponding to mod p or mod q of this quantity are both negative 1. And then you have this block corresponding to this thing. Right? So last time we in encryption, probability encryption, we use a computational assumption, which essentially state that computationally, with respect to polynomial time, the assumption says that it's impossible to distinguish a randomly chosen element from here and here to decide whether you are perfect square or pseudo square. Right. So this is the quadratic residue assumption. So namely, for the statement for infinitely many large prime P and Q, when you make product of n, if you choose a random element from in the unions of these two sets, you will be asked to predict whether it's perfect square or not perfect square. And the assumption is that there exists no polynomial time algorithm that can pass that test with probability better than half plus epsilon for any epsilon that is one polynomial in n. Right. So that one polynomial in the number of bits. Right. So that is the statement of the quadratic residual assumption, which means a random element is hard to tell whether it's perfect square or not perfect square in this two domain. And this is the one which I mentioned last time. It provides us a perfect so-called colorblind ink. Right. So that's the basis of the probability encryption. Right. Namely, we can write messages just writing this way, and since people couldn't tell the difference, then they're really reading this message as a unicolored message. But if one has P and Q, they can go in to decide further. Okay. So this is an assumption will also be used in the Blum sum generator. So this, you can clearly see, this generator came out of the encryption scheme. Right? Because the encryption scheme provided a lot of mathematical analysis, for example, ribbing scheme and so on, to allow at that time the construction to be focused on this particular assumption. Okay. So let me state this generator, which is exceptionally simple. It's just like the framework as we did in other generators. So this generator goes as following. It actually only works here. It only uses this domain, right? So which means that the generator will, in the construction phase, the generator will choose a larger prime P and Q, so they are Blum numbers, and construct n equal to PQ. So in this case, PQ will be kept as private number. So the generator will never release PQ, but it will release n. The generator will release n. Right. So from outside perspective, the only thing is known is n right now. Okay. So that's the initial setup of the construction. To generate a pseudo-random sequence, it just simply do the following. That is, you choose a random seed. So this you choose from QR. So this we usually say is we choose a uniform random seed. Right? So the entire element here will be treated as a sort of randomness. So which means every perfect square here will be chosen with probability equally. Right? So how many perfect squares are here? We have a quarter of P minus 1 and Q minus 1. So this is the number of elements here. So which means that in this generator, everybody here will be chosen with probability 1 over this number. Okay? So this is the setup. And as a generator, we can just treat as it's always an expansion of a particular seed. Then we assume the seed is uniform. Right? So there's two parts. So the generator itself has no randomness anymore. It's only the seed arrived has randomness. Then we continue trying to expand this randomness into sequence. Okay? So this is the seed. So QRN is a seed set. So the generator will just do the following. On one side, it will generate S0 and S1 is equal to S0 squared. Okay, and continue on. S2 is equal to S1 squared on n. So this is just like the generator, for example, we last time right based upon linear congruential, RSA, discrete log, right? So this clearly follows similar schema, and it harnesses the following randomness bits. So these are the patterns it will continue to compute, but it will harness the following bits. That Z0 equal to S0 mod 2, and so on. Right, it harnesses parity bits. Right. This schema, as you can see, is no different from the schema which we ever used last time. So that's why this linear congruential really produced essentially a generation of code, people by putting in different so-called nonlinear function in it. Right? So this is a minimal nonlinear function, right? Quadratic function. Right? This is a quadratic function, try to continue to move around here. Okay. So first, so we are going to analyze this. We want to prove that if, so the main theorem is under quadratic residue assumption, namely there's no polynomial time algorithm can do better than half plus epsilon for any 1 over polynomial to decide whether a random element is chosen from QR n or pseudo QRn to decide their perfect squareness in polynomial time. So under this assumption, there's no such algorithm exists. We want to prove this BBS generator is pseudo-random. Okay. Of course, with respect to polynomial time. So this is the main theorem that I'm going to prove. Right? So under the assumption that there is no polynomial time algorithm can statistically distinguish this from here, when elements are chosen randomly, 1 over polynomial time margin, then this sequence of randomness, as long as L is polynomial, will pass the pseudo-randomness test. So this is the main theorem. So you can see this generator is conceptually really simple, right? Because we used to say linear congruential didn't do well because it's a linear function. So to some degree, this is really the minimum nonlinear function. If you think about it, it went up 1 degree, then it just began to pounding out a little bit, right? So it's kind of remarkable. Just go to degree 2, you actually are able to produce bits that are pseudo-random under certain mathematical assumptions. So that's the entire generator. That's the entire. So you can see also why this is often used, right? Because RSA is more expensive to produce a bit. Right? You have to reach into a much bigger power, and here you're really reaching very small powers to compute. Right? So usually we compute this using this fast Fourier transform to handle the bits in multiplies. Okay, so this is the entire BBS generator. Okay, BBS generator. So main question: how do we analyze this? Right? How do we somehow prove a statement like this? Right? How do we formally set it up? And we essentially already has the main ingredient up to here, technically. The main ingredient is that, remember the Yaw's lemma. So first we have this epsilon distinguishable. Right, whether this sequence is epsilon distinguishable from a uniform sequence, that whole language. against polynomial time. And then basically we have yours next bit test. Right, so you all basically said if you block previous bit, you want to go next bit test. And if you can prove that every next bit pass through this test, then it's a universal test you need to do. Right. For them, actually, mathematically, they did a cute analysis. They said, if you really look at your next bit test, it's not different from so-called previous bit test. So namely, you give this sequence and you want to ask for the first bit. Right? Because you output the whole thing, whether to predict this bit or last bit, depending on which way order you gave, you can call this the last bit. Right? So the whole analysis essentially is self-reduced to analyzing the strength of this bit. Right? Because in each of the steps is a symmetric operation. You can talk about this bit is you release this punctual sequence to go here. Right? So this whole analysis is trying to prove that by releasing Z1 and ZL, releasing this, and as long as you keep PQ private, as long as this quadratic residue assumption hold, then releasing those bits will not provide you any knowledge of the first bit you produce. Right? So in order to prove this bit, clearly you just need to do a self-reduction to prove this way. Right? Releasing these bits does not help this bit. Right? So this is the setup of analysis. So that's why the power of your next bit is allow us to isolate out a technical lemma to prove that if you pass this bit test, because it's a universal test against polynomial time machine, and this allows us to localize the analysis. Okay. So the entire analysis is that this will be released, and you want to take your best shot to see what is first bit showed up. Suppose you block it. That's the first bit block. Okay. So this is a technical maneuver which I will attempt to prove. Okay? Good. Any question up to here? Because this proof is very elegant proof. I really want everyone to feel. It's almost like the lectures on Shamir's secret sharing scheme or the analysis of one-time pad. I want few of the project to completely go through so that we can always have one place to completely fall back. Okay, so let's take a shot at this. Okay, let me really remove anything I don't quite need on my board. So Jacobi symbol, I will conceptually remove them because we really don't need the computation of it. So let me remove them. So one of this assumption is following. The n is equal to PQ. Is that if you look at -1, so I just do a little bit of math, then I will try to connect with the other side. So if you look at -1 mod n, right? So what is -1 mod p? It's -1, right? What is -1 mod q? It's -1. Right? So this means -1 belong to QR. So -1 nicely live here. -1 nicely live here. Okay? -1 nicely live here. So this is where -1 belongs to. Right. So this means that when you take a number, when you multiply -1, you literally multiply an element here. Okay, good. So now, so that's that. So now let's consider some x belong to QRN. Suppose x belong to QRN, right? So what x belong to QRN means? Is it means that there exists y such that x equal to y squared mod n. Right? So this is what QRN means, right? That you exists a number that when you square it, it gives you x, right? That's QRN is defined, right? The perfect square. Okay? So so if you look at in this situation, and so if you look at negative x, where does negative x belong to? It belongs to here, right? Because negative x, right? Negative x mod p will be equal to negative y squared mod p right? So which means because mod p is against a prime, so this means that the Jacobi symbol is equal to negative 1. Right? So these elements is not a perfect square because against the prime number p, it only has 2 roots. Right? So which means that this number clearly has Jacobi symbol or Legendre symbol is negative 1. Okay? So this means that if you look at here, negative x. So if x belongs to QR, negative x will belong to QR. Right? So it will be in the pseudo QR. If you just negate it into pseudo QR. Right? If you negate it in the pseudo QR. Okay? So now basically if x can be written this way, that way great, right? If you negate, it will go to the other way. So if x is written this way, so which means that x is also equal to negative y squared mod n. Agree? Because if y squared is equal to x mod n, there's nothing different from negative y squared mod n. Right? So which means clearly negative y has to also be the square root of x. As we also knew in general that for element here, it has 4 square roots, right? It has 4 square roots. Right? We knew that every quadratic residue not just have 2 square roots, it has 4 square roots. Right? So if you look at the current situation, that because it has 4 square roots, right? So x actually technically has 4 square roots, right? So let's just think about the situation that if you look at the y, okay, suppose y is chosen from QR and intersect with QR. And suppose that y is happen to choose from this diagonal, right? So it has 4 square roots. Suppose the other one which is chosen this way, right? Suppose y is chosen from here, right? So now let's look at what happened. If you look at the x belong to here, so this means that if y belong to here, negative y will belong to here. And if y belong to here, negative y will belong to here. Right? So which means if y is chosen here, exactly one of them are in the perfect square. Okay? So one can use the Bloom property actually prove that for every x here, the square root actually are scattered in all quadrants. So which means that every perfect square has exactly one square root landed in QR. Every perfect square has a square root inside QR. And if and only if, because -1 flipped on the other side. Right, -1 flipped to the other side. Right, -1 flipped to the other side. Okay? So because -1 flipped to the other side, we'll take the square root in QR as its principal square root. So which means that every x has a principal square root in QR. So we call this square root in Q principal. The square root that is inside the QR that called a principal square root. And because -1 makes it the other way, this means that x can only have one principal square root in QR. Okay? X has one principal square root in QR. Right? Remember in the Rubin's test, if you get your hand onto the other two square roots, not plus minus one basic square root, you actually technically, if you get all four square root, you actually find the GCD of the P. Using GCD, you can get P and Q. Right? The difference of the other square root actually get you PQ out by GCD. Okay? So because each perfect square has one square root in which is also perfect square. So this means when you square it, it's actually a one-to-one map within here. This squaring function is a one-to-one map. It take a quadratic residue to another quadratic residue. It's one-to-one. You can't have two perfect square. When you square them, give the same number. Okay? So this is a one-to-one, which means this BBS operation is a permutation over the domain. So this often is a clean property for mathematical analysis. Right? Which means if you choose S randomly, S1 will be chosen randomly. Because it's as long as it's permutation, right? If you choose a random element and you permute, that element will be random. Right? If I have same probability. Okay? So this is a property which somehow underlying, even though this property often shows up in most of generators. But I just want to clarify that. Okay? So when you square this, you didn't create many-to-one map. You literally take a seed, because we continue to use those seeds, right? So if you produce many-to-one map, then suddenly you're losing a lot of randomness to a larger degree, because you create a compression of information. But at least when you square it, somehow nothing changed in terms of who can be possibly show up. If this is a uniform seed, then everybody can show up, still with the same probability. That's the next one. Right? So this gives you so this map is a permutation. Right? So which means x squared to x4. If you have perfect square, you square it again. Or maybe I should use a y squared to y to the 4. So this is a permutation of QR. This particular map is a permutation. Okay, and that's because it only it has two principal roots. If you choose y in QR, square it. Clearly, negative y will be in here, and you can't have another y which is squared to give you x, which means y is the only square root of x in QR. So this is how we are going to name calling it. That is, if your perfect square, one of your square roots that is perfect square is you call the principal roots. That's how we distinguish them from the rest of the roots for now. Okay, that's the principal square roots. So the BBS completely work on principal square roots if you do reversely, right? Because it go from perfect square to another perfect square, right? Perfect square to another perfect square, then you keep on wrapping on because your first assumption is perfect square. This give you here, right? This give you here. Agree? Excellent. So this is the BBS operation, right? So it's basically taking perfect square if you reversely read. So that's why somehow the previous bit is really studied as a chain of the principal square roots, right? If you finally look at this number, and its principal perfect square is released, which means that this whole chain is unique, right? If you look from ZL perspective, right? If finally you look at ZL as your last number, and this chain is uniquely determined too. It's not just when you hit S0, you uniquely define this chain. Even from SL perspective, when you go backward, it's uniquely defined because you just keep on saying, I'm relating with principal square roots, and that clearly uniquely defines the sequence too, mathematically. Okay, so we are going to use this property implicitly in the analysis. Okay. So this is really partially the connection to the previous bit, because when you consider this way, you have a same language of as if this is your seed, you produce it back. Okay. Good. So now I would like to get this predictor related with the QR assumptions, right? Because I want to say the following: if you can break BBS generator against this bit, I want to say that you actually break that assumption, right? That's the entire premises I want to prove, that if that assumption is true, then you cannot break this bit. Right? So which means, suppose someone, including you, are so clever to create these predictors.
Sorry, I have a question. So,
okay.
It cannot happen that you hit a loop where you square a number, it gives you a number, and then you square it, give you a number, and then this number on the square gives you the first number, and you start being in a loop.
You can.
It can happen, right?
Yeah, it can happen. Yeah, because it's permutation, you may have smaller orbits in this thing.
Yeah, so how if you pick a number you form from QR, right? But some numbers will give you, like you said, the orbit, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So this will not make
so the whole language will eventually use the fact this is uniform. Should be chosen.
Yeah, but if you pick something
right.
before and it give you inside an orbit.
So this also implies when you take uniform, the orbit is large. The computation assumption essentially implies that too. Under this assumption, when you take a uniform element, this orbit is large. Very good instinct, right? Because this is really orbits now. Right? Once you have permutation, right? So what is permutation? Permutation is literally written as a unit of orbits, right? Which means that I'm going to you, you're going to that location, you're going to that location. The big orbit you can do is just everyone take a round. But clearly permutation usually is not looking at that. It could be a few of us take an orbit and a few of you take an orbit. Occasionally you go to yourself, then you get out of, you'll be stuck, as you said, right? This is great intuition. Right? So this is why the assumption S is uniform has to play the in, and it's tangled with this assumption of complexity. And it's implied that if this assumption is true, the orbit, which is random element, is not polynomial elements. Right. But the instinct totally right? Because if you couldn't jump start yourself, you're dead, right? So imagine you choose yourself to be 1. If you choose yourself to be 1, what sequence you will get? 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, right? But that is, it's a probability that can happen, right? So that's why you can't say there's no random sequence has 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1 in it.
Yeah, I thought about it, give some numbers. I found that if you choose n to be 9, speed q equal. 4 and 7 give each other. 4 squared is 7 squared.
Yeah, sometimes you have different periodicity. Yeah, it's a complex thing, right? It's complex thing. Right? That's why you can see that the computational assumptions sometimes are powerful assumptions, right? Because suddenly you said you can't break that thing, you really assume a lot of mathematical structure into the problem. Agree? Because unless someone break this code, break this assumption, then this assumption is there that it does imply that you have large objects. But I'm glad you brought up this object, right? In something it showed up the other day, remember? When we do the RC, remember in RC, we showed up 96 bits. we began to have the same sequence again, right? You can see this can happen, right? Can happen. So this assumption, computational assumption is powerful assumption. It's assumed a lot. But sometimes you may not, for every element, explicitly what mathematical structure you assume. But you assume your adversary to be so powerful. Right? So their justification is that if you don't believe an assumption, produce one to break it. So that's why so far no one mathematics is able to do that. Right? Other than in the quantum world. Right? Because they are clearly the answer. Quantum analysis eventually factored, which means they break this PR. They're able to harness certain information. Right? Excellent point. Excellent point. Okay? Yeah, so this is exactly the other day when you see it. So that's why it's good to run some experiments, right? The other day is, even I look at that, gosh, if we just choose a few random primes, and already occasionally you do hit a low information sequence, right? Because 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1 is often we call low information sequence. And if your construction may itself have certain periodicity, then clearly people can look at your function and decide, that's it, it's just all ones, like the other day, right? Because we already decided 96. That day when you encrypt with 97 against whatever the 2 primes we choose, will be 96. We already determined that, right? And that day clearly we decide, afterward I'm predicting your sequence, doesn't matter what you say now, right? Excellent point. Okay, excellent point. But you can see this assumption is a powerful assumption. It's a very strong assumption. Say, no polynomial time machine can tell a random chosen element from this, when PQ are large, randomly chosen unknown. We're talking about the computational signal that you can harness against these two sets. Those are powerful statements. So suppose someone cleverly built this predictor, try to basically when you have Z1 to ZL, attempt to predict the 0, right? So which means that the probability B0, B1 to ZL equal to B0. That's for some epsilon, which is 1 over polynomial. Okay, suppose someone did this. So I want to show that you can crack this assumption with epsilon related with this epsilon. Okay, so that is where I would like to first set up. So this will mathematically tie the existence of this predictor to the existence of a clever algorithm to be used. Right. So this, you can see the polynomial time reduction or randomized polynomial time reduction that founded in the complexity study of NP and P provide the fundamental bridge in try to have a mathematical language of whether certain things are random or not, or close to random or not, right? So we profoundly use that assumption, right? So that's why to prove something is pseudo-random, the complexity framework offered us a path to analyze, namely to say that if someone break the pseudo-randomness, then you should break some other assumptions, right? And this is a polynomial time reduction, right? This is just like polynomial time reduction when you study NPs. Right? So it's polynomial time reduction. Okay? So I want to use this to break this. Okay? I want to use this to break this. So how's my board situation? I actually today planned my board not too smart. So let's see. don't think my board is smart enough, so let me do one more. I should have put this one on that and that one on this. So you can see different permutation has different, it provided different solutions. Okay. So this is just a mathematical statement, so let me remove that. Right. So the main thing left over here is there's a notion of principal roots. So how do we predict? How do we use this to solve QR assumptions? Right. So here is a simple protocol that almost take no effort somehow related to this predicate. So suppose you give me x. So the input is you give me x. Right. That is belong to QRN. Unions QR pseudo n, right? And you want to decide whether it's here or here, right? So that is this assumption attempt to do, right? I give you input, you have to tell me whether it's perfect square or not. Okay? So now because I have these powerful predictors, P0, I want to reduce to that. And here is an attempt to try to solve this problem. So let me call Alvin let's call QR analysis on X. Right? So let's do a QR analysis on X. At least we may not solve this problem. I want to be correlated with the correct answer. Right? So currently I don't know X belongs to here or X belongs to here. Right? So what I'm going to do is I will let S1 equal to X squared. S2 equal to S1, SL, L minus 1, so right, so this is polynomial time computation. In many ways, I'm emulating a pseudo-random number generators now, right? And I will define Z1 equal to S1. Okay? I'm defining this right now, right? Because you give me X, I don't know whether it's a perfect square or not. Let me still produce this sequence. Because I knew, other than this first step, everybody else, I'm just following a square. Right? Because if I square this, I'm in this chain. I just continue to go, right? Which means I'm producing those bits myself. So now I'm asking the question of B0. Right? And what I'm interested in is whether this clearly is equal to X mod 2. Really, I'm interested in this question, right? Just think about this. If X happens to be a perfect square, your predictor is an attempt to predict my parity bits. If X happens to be quadratic, perfect square. But if X is not a perfect square, so there's only two cases, right? Case 1, X belongs to QR. And case 2, X belongs to right? So in either case, one thing I knew is that if X belongs to here, or let's look at this case. If X belongs to here, that means negative X belongs to QR. Right? Right? If X belongs to, because negative 1 belongs to here, when you multiply negative 1, you will push it back into the QR. So this is a very beautiful, convenient fact that X and negative X, do they have the same parity? is x and negative x has same parity? No, x and negative x has different parity because n is an odd number. Right? Remember, what is negative x? It's literally n minus x, right? This is your negative x. And n is an odd number, this will flip the parity. Right? So n will flip your parity. So negative x and x actually has different parity, always, in this game. Right, good. So basically, this means that for all x in this domain, one mathematical fact we know is x mod 2 is not equal to negative x mod 2. Right, because negative x flipped, n minus x flipped the parity. Right? So which means for every perfect square, or not perfect square, that when you take a negation, the parity definitely changed. So which means one of them has a correct parity, one doesn't have correct parity. If you think about this prediction, right? So intuitively, if your predictors are so powerful, you should align with the fact that I am a perfect square, right? So that's why my analysis simply should just say, if it is a yes, I just said x belongs to QR, and if no, I will say x belongs to. So this is my QR analysis algorithm, assuming that you or somebody else created these wonderful predictors for the first place, right? So here I only use one mathematical assumption property, that is x is different from negative x in parity. Which means that when I'm running this analysis, either I have the right x in the QR, the principal roots, or I have the negation of it, and because of this, my parity flipped. So in some sense, I'm using what I'm here or there based upon how your instinct of analysis made these bits. And because you said you build this predictor, it's so powerful, and you try to produce a gap. If for this number you can get a gap, then I should be able to harness that correlation, right? So because you said you had a correlation, I'm just using this correlation, right? So this is the step to reduce to here, saying that if you're able to predict this gap by 1 plus epsilon, then we are epsilonly correlated now, right? This analysis and this analysis is also epsilon correlated, right? So this to a large degree related with our homework. Remember I assigned this homework to say, when you try to crack RSA, you crack a fraction of it, right? This is related to that statement, which means that we knew that in expectation, you're right, which means that there's a certain fraction you can do right. You don't know who you're doing right yet, right? So this is why we still need one more step to actually really solve this quadratic residual assumption, right? The quadratic residual assumption require you to precisely analyze a particular number. So everybody see, right? At least I harness the correlation, right? So that's why this particular setup of y'all's previous bits is precisely in this. That's why I call it simple proof, right? It's precisely what it needed to this correlation. There's no other noise here, right? It's just simply we have two possibilities. One is negation of the other one. I just don't know which one. And since you said you can tell with a number here with some margin, and I just use your intuition, I just set up the correlation. Okay? So this is how far we can go. At least I'm able to say that my correlation transfer into not just that bit, actually, I'm transferred into what I'm able to tell the difference between the two. Right. So now in order to boost that, or to make it totally right, we actually do exactly similar, like almost like homework. That's why I assigned that homework, mostly trying to set up for this particular class. So now again, so let's do a stronger QR analysis. So then I will tie all the analysis into this together. The stronger QR analysis again is input X belong to QRN or QR the pseudo n, which means that we choose any element here, and I want to decide, I want to claim that with probability for every such element, I can get correct enough correlations. Okay, and so here is just one small step going over here. Then you can see that suddenly this analysis is, even a schema is fairly generic, and it actually showed up in homework too. Okay, that is, so I want to analyze this thing, but this could be an arbitrary number, right? So what I'm going to do in the first step, I choose a random R, and I compute, let's see, I'm not using a W, because R square mod n. Right. So by taking this step, I choose a random element here, right? By taking this step, I choose a random element here. And second, so this also allows me to set up a loop later on. Second, so let me define x prime is equal to W times R times X, which means R squared times X mod n. So remember I hinted earlier, this gives you random permutation. R squared times this gives you random. So R squared is a random element, right? And if I multiply this, it's basically, if you're inside this set, I give you random permutation. It's randomly permuted here. Right? Because everybody has inverse, right? So this is all one-to-one map, right? There's no many-to-one map, right? This is just literally a permutation, a random permutation. Right? So which means I create, literally this X is uniform random number in QR. Right? So this randomized thing. It's randomized. Okay? So this element is uniform now. If this is uniform, right? Because this is uniform here. So I choose random elements and I square it. Okay? So then essentially I'm running this analysis. I use this analysis against X prime. Right? So which means that I will compute, so let me just rewrite S1 equal to X prime square mod n XL equal to X prime square mod n. Right. So this I give me Z1 equal to S1 mod 2. Right. This SL mod 2, right? So then I will use the same computation. P0, D1 to DL, if it's equal to X prime mod 2. We want interested in this question, right? And if it's equal, I will say X belongs to QR. And otherwise, if no, then it's X belongs to. Right. So I just copied this analysis through, and so if you look at this actually, I tied this analysis to this assumption. Remember, this assumption says that if my S0 is uniformly chosen random elements, then by making this prediction, I can be correct with half plus epsilon probability. Right? So now actually I'm really tied with this assumption now, right? If I have uniform elements, you claim that your probability to be correct is half plus epsilon. Right? So that's why this is exactly the assumption now. I'm on the table here. So I will say that if you E0 break the pseudo-randomness, the first bits, then clearly you should do this correctly. You should get the right principal roots of this correctly, right? But x prime, if you look at this operation, right? So here we use x belong to QR. If and only if x prime belongs to QR. Now, because by multiply a square, I didn't change the fact whether it's belong to it's a perfect square or not. Right? If I was perfect square, I'm still perfect square in x prime. And if I was not perfect square, then multiplying square didn't make me perfect square. Right? So this is a totally randomizer. It's a totally randomizer preserved property. Right? It preserves the property that x is a perfect square. Right? So which means that if you can get x prime correctly, it's same as getting x correctly. Right? In the whole process, I did not change the property of x. Right? So that's why I transfer the prediction of x into the prediction of x prime. Right? Then I transfer the prediction of x prime into the prediction of the first bit. And because you claim against a random seed, you're doing so brilliantly, then clearly against x prime, if x prime is in perfect square, you have to be half plus epsilon correlated. Right? So this actually transferred to here. And this basically immediately states the probability that for all x, the probability is stronger QR analysis is correct. It's also greater than half plus epsilon. Right? This transferred that gap without any modification. So that's why I call this a simplistic analysis of this phenomenon. Right? Somehow they find the right problem in the whole proof. There's no struggle, right? It's just continue just the same thing pushed through. So this reduced to this guy. And notice this is true for all x, right? This I said it for all x. For every single x, you're able to break through. Right. And how do you increase the probability we improve? So this is related with the homework I did not ask. Right? Remember, I made the mistake of epsilon to 1 minus epsilon thing. If you really want to increase probability, what do? Just repeat this thing, right? Because this becomes uniform state. Right? So you can repeat this thing around. Right? So that will essentially drive this almost to 1. Right? You can drive this almost to 1, but just by trying certain number of times. Right. So if you boost up field multiple times, and this probability, the boost up version can go to 1. You can drive this as close as to 1 as possible. Right. Because this is just an independent analysis. You just need flipping independent coins. Right? So you can see in this whole generator analysis, in some sense, the only bridge that we take are 2 things. 3 things. One is there's a simple permutation we can produce. Right? So this it's really often we call it homomorphic type of thing, right? You can somehow homomorphically transfer certain secrets, move around. Algebraically, somehow it created into a better controlled or randomized situation. And secondly, the crossover is really this crossover, the Yaw's bit analysis protocol, right? It provides a bridge from the distribution distinguisher into a sort of a bit predictors. It's analyzing a single bits. So that afterward actually essentially just a very elementary, it's very elementary mathematical classification. Okay. So this is the entire analysis of BBS. And so before this this paper, most of the I tried early on just for fun to teach the full analysis of one generator in one class. I was never able to. Some other one always have a little bit of complexity, and one has to set up more. But this is literally as clean and as simple as can be for pseudo-randomness. So that's why I really, hope you can fully, at least, walk the way. Years later, many things may decay. Just like, every time I prepare this class, I have to read a little bit. I can't just immediately pick it up. But for example, this particular one, I really enjoy teaching is because my rehearsal time of this lecture is much shorter than many other lectures. Because certain lectures, if I don't rehearse enough, I will inevitably say one word wrong, then the next 10 minutes I won't be able to recover. But this quickly one can really put into the entire mind. It's this simple. Okay. Andy.
Do you have to bound your probability in case like your powers end up looping together? So for instance, if like your random number is 1, you get like the same information over and over again.
Oh, you mean yeah, so this you can see it didn't go through that particular it didn't go through the orbit analysis. Somehow it's all embodied in this assumption that it's difficult, right? So which also embodied that to say the moment you can break through, which means you may exploit certain periodicities, right? Because we even didn't make it, it could be periodicity analysis, right? For example, the quantumly try to break the group theory, essentially try to analyzing many periods simultaneously, and then they somehow can harness signal, right? So it could just be that your B0 did a very clever random process analysis. Could be, right? But you can see in the entire process, it only reduced to the average case analysis of this bit, to the probabilistic analysis of each of those numbers. That's the map of reduction, right? So it didn't particularly say that which property you beat here is transferred there. It's slightly more generic connection, right? It just said as long as you can break through with information gap computationally, this continuous map, this random match map, it can harness that gap.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Right? So that's why it could just all be that you do fancy, So that's why this assumption assumes that there could be some other analysis that had nothing to do with the pattern of those things. Somehow miraculously, people can see the correlation, right? And even that is just mapped back, right? Even that is just they just mapped back. It all comes from because of this. Not this line now, right? It all comes back because this particular map. This particular map tie with an average case statement. Right? There's no other properties used in the entire analysis anymore, other than x and the negative x happen to fall into different buckets. Yeah. So any question up to here? So A clean product, I think often for mathematical studies, the clean material, I used to, as in some sort of good student, bad researcher, is that when I see something clean and simple, I just say, oh, I understand, I just move on. And usually somehow, when something is so clean, I will say, let me really internalize this thing, right? So that's why at the beginning, sometimes when I do research, I keep on pounding my head on something very complicated. And occasionally you miss what can be inspired by a very clean protocol, right? But clearly for many other protocols, one need to essentially apply this principle, but whenever certain property is not as simple as this, one try to find some other approximations, another way, another path to go. And this I actually will harness a particular statement, which is totally clever, that is finally we are going to prove the following thing in hopefully not Monday, but the Monday after I came back from New York. That is from in fact from every one-way function. It doesn't matter how bad the one-way function is, as long as it's a one-way function. Namely, those you can compute in one way, and with low probability you can get the entire input out, not just single bits. You can use that one-way function to produce pseudo-random numbers. Right? So this is one of the remarkable theorem actually proved in computer science. And this take a research in multiple tries to get this thing. Right? So ultimately the statement is following. So you can see those eventually become special case, right? But it's this type of analysis eventually set up is a much more global statement. So the following is true for every one-way function. One-way function literally means that if you randomly choose x, for any x you can compute fx. And if you choose randomly x, I give you fx. The probability you can get x prime equal to x is visible, right? Of this entire number. It doesn't mean any bits, right? Because if fx is one way, I can, for example, append another bit always 0, and I send it through, I just output the first fx. That's still one way, even though I knew the first bit. Right? So one way is a very, very weak conditions in terms of a bit complexity. Every bit is strong. Okay? And ultimately people break through to prove that from such hardness, you are able to harness bit version of such thing to prove that you are able to produce pseudo-random numbers to polynomial lengths. Okay. So the reason I would like to at least sketch that proof, that also I think partially why the book actually includes that, is because from research or from the creative thinking perspective, which I will also highlight, is that they actually tried a bridge, it didn't cross. The most intuitive bridge, it didn't cross. So until people actually solved the problem by totally build a separate bridge. And this separated bridge didn't solve these conjectures. Many people piled time trying to solve this conjecture. There's one obvious conjecture people attempt to solve for years, and nobody solved it. And then people cleverly build another conjecture has nothing to do with the conjecture to this great strength. They cross the bridge. They produce pseudo-randomness, right? So this is why a lot of this schema continually allow people to pounding what can be relaxed in such analysis so that probably continue to go. Right. So any question up to here? So yeah, this is in my mind one of the most beautiful material in terms of cryptography. It has certain issues about it's made a concrete assumption, right? But beyond that, everything come out just as elementary as clean as possible. Okay. Plus, this generator is reasonably practical. You can produce bit at quite fast rate. Right? So that's why it's often used in practice.
I have a elementary question about pseudo-random.
Okay.
You always say that we choose the seed, the uniform, right?
Yes.
How we do that? How we do uniform choose? Because we invented pseudo-random because we cannot do uniform.
No, that's a pseudo-random is in some sense a hybrid study, right? It didn't say you. So the main focus is to study if you give me certain degree of randomness, I can produce far more large sequence that appear to be random. So you should treat this as a sort of an expansion of randomness.
So why, if you are able to do random?
So for example, if you have 0 bit, there's no bit you can do random, then nobody can produce random sequence. Right? Because it's deterministic. Right? So the pseudo-randomness technically later on give rise to another field called randomness extractors. So this is the early simplest version extractor, namely from a uniform random seed, you can extract a long-looking, clearly not random but pseudo-random sequence, right? And it gave rise other study to say if you collection of numbers have some entropy. Once you have entropy, which means it's not deterministic, then people can computationally harness that entropy and begin to produce pseudo-randomness like sequence. And that is a highly non-trivial study actually. Right. So the clever here is that it's not so that's why it is all based upon that initial application, right? How do you do symmetric key communication? Right? How do you do symmetric key communication? In that setting, what is the desired property is that you and I has one private way to set up something. Right? Then afterward, we want to talk for unpredictable length of time because you know when you fight in a war, it didn't say 3 days later it's finished. And then it means that you can come back. We can still figure out a way to communicate, right? And there could just be one side. We luckily enough to get our privacy going. So that's why the study of trying to get unknown into larger unknowns is the guiding principle of pseudo-random number generation, right? So that's why it's always about you have certain randomness, you want to create unbelievable large random sequence that people cannot break. Right. So that's why the field benefited from this classical application, right? But otherwise, it could be, you know, people are struggle to figure out that I look at the heat source, I look at, for example, certain principles from physics. Then you said that I will take certain measurement, I will harness all the randomness, right? People study this, right? But it's all eventually strengthened by such analysis, right? That's why I said there's a larger field called extractors. Extractor literally means that I have a body of numbers, they have some distribution. And it's not even out of my control, right? For example, if you measure wind speed, there's certain randomness, right? You can't just say wind speed totally deterministic. It came with certain distribution, right? So for the extractors means that when you measure wind speed, and if the wind speed has certain entropies, you know, may not be on top of Los Angeles, you know, you have to probably go to the Caribbean, you know, in the hurricane seasons. There's a significant randomness there, right? So then you just measure the velocity, wind speed, directions, and you collect those data. You know, it gives you a larger body of measurements, right? and then you have algorithm also just work from there, and you are able to extract not nearly as efficient as here now. But here is almost polynomially. This goes really efficient, right? Because L I can set up to be polynomially long. My seed is really small, right? In many ways, right? And but on the other hand, pseudo-randomness, the study here also, yeah. So there you can, which means that the theory is you can harness to a certain degree of randomness out of the certain entropy distribution. distribution with entropies, right? And the other type of study is also highlighted by connecting pseudo-randomness with a lot of the reduction here. It's literally an attempt to solve, it's a complexity study, right? So which means that if you are able to produce pseudo-random sequence of polynomial long from logarithmic seeds, NP and P is not that far away anymore. Because, if you do from a logarithmic seed to, because you can enumerate your seeds, right? So that's another way to reduce computation, right? So if the world can be conquered by randomized algorithm, and you have a generator to go very low seed to long seed, then this also has consequence of deterministic computation, right? Because you can enumerate your seeds, because you said in randomly I can almost solve your problem, but if you enumerate, you have to hit correctly, right? So they have other consequences and so on, but this, to a larger degree, in many ways correctly said that initially, is really from the symmetric key encryption. Right? Symmetric key encryption means you have some random sequence, uniformly chosen. We are together, what do you choose? Uniform. That's best. Like Shannon theorem said, that's the best you can do. Right? So if we are generous, we want to fight, why do we choose something less random? Right? So then basically afterward, we want to expand this. Any question? Good question. Okay, so I did deliver faster than what I expected. Why don't I just mention to you a very small protocol? Otherwise this will be all business, right? So let me mention a small protocol, very closely connected with some of those studies. Okay. So many of those studies give rise to a very interesting family of small protocols, and they later on become sort of the building block for many other schemas. So one of the small protocol, combining randomness with encryption and all those things, is a notion called Algorithmic transfer, and it's quite a creative little game. Suppose you have a sender and a receiver, and the sender is going to send the receiver something. Okay, so the most elementary algorithmic transfer is try to implement the following probabilistic channel or stochastic channel. That is, so imagine I have a secret I want to tell you. Okay, I have a secret I want to tell you. Then I said something, and you heard me, right? And 50% chance you got my secret, and 50% chance you didn't get my secret. It's not perfect communication. It's it's one of this stochastic communication. However, I have no idea whether you get what I said. So crypto study, create a keen focus on so-called try to design things that are looking paradoxical, right? So a lot of the deeper push of this paradoxical phenomena allow one to recognize more and more the envelope of what can be achieved with computational assumption. Right? So along this direction, one of the oblivious transfer schema is try to say, can we model sort of unreliable communication? Even the sender doesn't know whether the receiver understood. Right? Sometimes as you understand, and you just keep on looking at me, smile. Okay? So then, even though you understand, I have no idea you understood, and but the 50% chance you will understood. Okay, so this is one kind of paradoxical protocol. Can we design protocols that somehow is this oblivious? I say something, you may or may not understand. I don't know you understand or not, but you have decent chance you understand me. Okay, so this eventually. So that's why once when people began to build one small, so this is why the study, the reason I want to use this as an opportunity is that we have classical applications, military, secure communication, right? That's essentially has been driven for most of our discussion, right? Encryptions and pseudo-randomness is all within this communication things, right? Secret sharing is all, it's all military initiated in many ways for beginning. And then when people began to understand them, they actually create some other intellectual games. Right? Because they can, and because it could be fun, and because they may have short answers, and by studying them, people may know certain limits. Right? So, for example, there's another version of oblivious transfer. It's called 1 out of 2 oblivious transfer. So 1 out of 2 oblivious transfer means that I have 2 messages. I have 2 messages that I want to send to you. Okay? So then we begin to talk. I have 2 messages I want to send to you. And at the end of the day, you can open one of the messages, not 2. Okay, I have 2 messages I want to send to you. At the end of the day, you can open one of the messages. More than that, I don't know which one you open. Right, so there will be communication, clearly behave almost like encryptions, right? And behave almost like encryption. So this is what public key encryption will enable people to think, because suddenly, when they have public key encryption, they really want to push the envelope. What information only we can support in these communication channels, right? And those channels later on are used to build, for example, the notion of multi-party computation, right? So this has been people's objective for a very long time, particularly in the right of democracy, right? So election, we are facing a great election this year. So phenomenal election. So in election, if you look at one of the rudimentary problems, is that the people have private data of preference. And as a society, we want to make social choice, right? Which means that we would like to choose at least to a certain degree correlated with people's will, right? This is a fundamental difficult task in general, because normally it relates to what we call information reduction, right? Because it's reducing information into 1 or 2 bits of few choice, right? And but still, for example, in U.S. Presidential election, assuming it's only 2 candidates now, and that the choice indeed is people's preference you want to compute, so that the winner is properly chosen, right? And in this kind of social choice, and but on the other hand, in some sense, democracy can work is because the winner cannot punish people who didn't vote for them, right? If a winner can punish people, like shut down the bridge or something, right? That's a separate life, right? So which means that in the most idealistic election, what idealistic election is that we can verify our outcome, and we didn't give up our privacy, right? And this is clearly in some sense, I call model problem for multi-party computation, right? What is multi-party computation? We all have our private data, xi, and there's a public function we have, right? Summation, or even one bit, right? Called majority, right? So election, technically, you don't have to, ultimately with two candidates, if everyone vote, you don't have to decide who win by what margin. Suppose that's easily irrelevant. You just need to know who wins, right? For example, you have odd number of people, one person will win, right? If you vote only two candidates, you have to vote, right? So then, in some sense, this is just a simple function, right? You are computing majority of, say, 2n plus 1 bits. Right? You want to maintain the bit integrity, right? So it's a paradoxical question, right? Nobody wants to give out the information, but we deem we have to verify the solution, right? Otherwise, we don't trust such a system, right? So you can see a lot of this kind of social choice or public choice schema rely on certain paradoxical maneuver of information, right? So that's why the initial study of secure communication started very pure, but nevertheless, when people began trying to do more public key encryption, they quickly are thinking about such a problem. Can I make accumulation of information in a secure but verifiable way, right? And those are also the background when people began to think out of the box to see, in order to build such election schema, I need to build a few simple things that people can make simple talks, right? So obligate transfer was partially also come out in this sort of curiosity-driven, but nevertheless, there's a sort of other security problem floating our head, right? And so that's why the one of our two obligate transfer eventually played a quite critical role in design not just this two-pair communication, which we see mostly in this class so far, right? Other than secret sharing right now, right? But secret sharing is one of the places that breaks through two-party, and that actually also played a role in the election schema or multi-party schema, right? And the other way is somehow have fairly stochastic communication that allow one to hide certain information. So the other, for example, I'm not going to lecture into this because I want to put it in your head, and if you're interested, it's me driving you to think about it, and if you really want to see a construction, you can always Google them, okay? You can see the solution. When I have lectures has a gap, I have a few hours, I can go over some of the protocols, right? But I just want you to take this class, particularly in light of Kevin Knight's class coming up soon, is really to try to, even though we discuss a lot of technical things and eventually try to narrow down our definition, what's information knowledge and so on, and they are in a much broader context. And sometimes by having few concrete proof in our system, and we are able to imagine also better in some other applications. Okay? So they are, those are the protocol, which, I will highlight a few later on, that allow one to go out of this mode of handling information in general. Right? So for example, later on when we enter this state discussion of zero knowledge proof, which you can see is also implicitly driven by just secure social choice, right? Because you have to do this multi-party computation. Right? So that's why you want to have some mechanism to do proofs. The party it could be identification, like the ATM machine. Is this practical type of problem continue to drive what people want to design as protocol? And in their direction, eventually people come up some other primitive or protocol, like a so-called a sealed envelope. They literally try to digitally encode in a sealed envelope. Namely, you put your ballot into an envelope. So you can see this comes closer to election, right? You put your ballot in an envelope, and it should have the properties. The moment you sealed it, you can't go back to change your mind anymore. Right? That means once you voted, you can't just suddenly say, my candidate didn't win, let me flip my vote. It doesn't matter anymore, right? Right? So when you put down envelope, you put down envelope. But this envelope is opaque. The envelope is opaque, right? So when people pick up the envelope, it's like a physical envelope. You just can't quite immediately reprint, right? It's opaque, but you're already committed. And it can only open when some other information comes across. So this, in some sense, gives you a sense of possibility of running election, right? Running election, it comes closer to real life, right? You go to that thing, you see what it is, and this envelope should be untraceable, right? You can't trace back to you when they open, but when they open, it opens exactly what you put in, and once you put in, you cannot change your mind. So you can only open one way, and it can only open when, in the right moment it can be opened, right? So some of those particles later on you will see in the class, at the beginning they sound a little bit silly, a little bit sort of, what do you call the, remember years ago, Scientific America always do this different kind of mathematical games? I think as a kid, I don't know how many of you, I mean, they're not, somehow the Scientific America, the statues, I guess the internet really drive everything to the ground, right? Because people are able to read many things from multiple sources. And I think when I came to this country, Scientific America in the 80s, still in the heydays. And back then, there's something called library, which I don't know whether you know. Something called library. And all students actually spend most of the time when you need to do something, you go to library. And so what library is they have a few sofas, you can collect a few books and put on your sofa. And you're poor, you can't make copies because it's too expensive to copy. And if you read, actually I just had a conversation with an Edelman yesterday. We had a long chat before lunch. We all basically complain, it's so hard to read other people's writing, right? And in research, you have to read other people's writing. You read an article. Let me tell you, it's very hard to read other people's article. So it's not that this book is hard to read. Reading is generally hard. So normally, when you read, you get very unhappy, because you can't just read through. And then, but you can't leave your seats. If you leave your seats, somebody else will take that seats, right? So what do you do? Back then, you might say, I just grab a few copies of Scientific America, but I just hate this reading now, and then you can read that, you can think about a few mathematical game, or they have beautiful writers. Somehow they write this mathematics in a slightly, they're more pleasant to read, and it's just not my research at that time. But they often come with small little particles, and later on people find them in coding theory. They find them, they find them into a variety of information structures, right? So that's why periodically we are entering a stage to look at more particles now, particularly in your possible presentations, and that, so that's why hopefully, we are gradually shifting away from this die-hard proof into a little bit more creative period of time. So, okay. So I think today, this evening I may send out a tentative sequence of the presentation time. Then we have to juggle a little bit. If you didn't get your absolute ideal days, hopefully I can find enough people to work with me. We can get a feasible sequence. Yeah. Okay. So, Shang, you want to borrow my book?
No, I've got access to it.
You got access. Okay. Yeah. If you do, I literally don't study this book from Wednesday to Friday.
No, it's fine.
Listen, I'm walking out of this classroom. If you want. So everybody else did get the correct copy of the book, right? Edition 2, right? It looked like this. And yeah, unfortunately, I think I didn't probably provide enough information. Basically, where are the homeworks? You point to a page, there's no homework.
I have the